through much last week. We got through the first 10 verses, and that's perfectly fine. I enjoy those types of studies. One of the things I like to try to do as we're studying through this is make practical application for modern day. You know, we're not under the law of Moses, obviously. And so the way to do it is to learn from it and take what we can and apply it, as is often prayed, apply it to our lives. So verses 1 through 4 of chapter 5 were about quarantine. It's addressed throughout the book of Leviticus. Chapter 5, verses 5 through 10, laws of confession of sin and restitution. And, of course, Zacchaeus. We looked at Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 9. We talked about confession of sin and all of that. Now, the rest of chapter 5 is very interesting. Verses 11 through 31. And my Bible breaks that section off and calls it concerning unfaithful wives. In our culture is and has been for some time extremely gynocentric. In other words, focused primarily on the rights of women. That's a big push in the political realm. I don't know how many of you watch news and things, but you've heard a lot about DEI over the last couple of years, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not so much looking at a person's qualifications as much as you're looking at their intersectionality, looking at their gender, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, and essentially it's like those are the things that qualify a person. Thankfully, it seems over the last year or two, the tide is turning against that. So when we deal with passages like this, our culture has kind of a whiplash reaction. Well, what about men? Okay, settle down. All right. There are laws for men too. This is a very specific instance, though, that the law of Moses is addressing. And so we'll get started. Obviously, we're not going to read all of these verses, but we are going to break it down and look at this. So, here's how I have it in your outline. A woman who did commit adultery, or who was suspected of having committed adultery, but with no witnesses. And that's key in this particular section. There are no witnesses. Because what does the law of Moses require in terms of the guilt of adultery? Witnesses, right? Think of John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, the woman taken in adultery. Okay? She was taken in the very act. Well, what then does the law of Moses, do you remember? What did the law of Moses then require of the witnesses who first came forward? What were they supposed to do? Well, let me ask you this first. What was the penalty for committing adultery? Stoning. Who? Both of them, right? Not just the woman, not just the man, both. So what was required of those who witnessed it? Anybody know? They cast the first stone. So that would be a heavy burden, wouldn't it? Okay, this person committed, all right, you cast the first stone. That's on you now. So what happened when Jesus brought it to that point? They left, from the oldest to the youngest. Now, there are multiple problems with that little incident there in John chapter 8. Where was the man? Right? And as is typical with Jesus' enemies, they weren't really concerned about truth. They were concerned about getting Jesus in trouble. But anyway, this particular section, a woman who did commit adultery, or who was suspected by her husband of committing it. And if you look at the end of verse 13, there is no witness, nor was she caught, the New King James says. All right? The King James says there was no witness, neither she be taken with the manner. That's a bit wordy. She wasn't caught in the act. Okay? So there's this spirit of jealousy. I wrote out in the margin of my Bible, suspicion. There's this suspicion on the part of the husband. Let me ask you a question for those of you who have been married any length of time. Is suspicion a thing? Can it be a thing? Sure. But suspicion isn't enough, right? So you have the spirit of jealousy that comes upon the husband. No evidence, again, no witnesses, but he suspects something. Okay? Verse 14, the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife. And again, jealousy in the sense of the spirit of suspicion, best way to put it, I guess. And her husband, and be kept close, and she be defiled, and there be no witness against her. Verse 13, or it is the spirit of jealousy, the last part of verse 14, come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be not defiled. Okay, so it could be he doesn't have a very good feeling about this for whatever reason. There is a test that can be administered. Now, so she passes the test. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. Well, then what? Well, he's got to live with her now. I suppose the husband and wife are going to have to work that out. She didn't commit adultery, but if she did, I think this is interesting. So there is this solution, and I think that's the right word. There are offerings to be made. The husband is to bring her before the priest, along with the grain offering. That goes back to Leviticus chapter 5. If innocent, there is no consequence to her. Okay. So the priest brings her near, verse 16. Verse 17, he takes the holy water in an earthen vessel, and the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, he's going to put it there, mix it in the water. The priest shall set the woman before the Lord and uncover the woman's head and put the offering of memorial in her hands. Verse 18. Verse 18 in the King James, it doesn't use the word, New King James doesn't use the word memorial. It says remembering in her hands, which is the grain offering of jealousy. So all of this is obviously related, the grain offering of jealousy. All right. The priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that causes the curse. And the priest shall charge her by oath. And I think this is an important part of this subject too, or this particular text too. And say unto the woman, if no man have lain with thee, and if thou hast not gone aside to uncleanness with another instead of thy husband, be thou free from this bitter water that causes the curse. Well, as you read the text, the curse is, and I put this in your outline here, if guilty, her thigh. Some people say that this is a reference to the uterus. That's your next blank. The thigh, some say uterus, verse 28, would rot and her stomach would swell. Whatever it is, thigh, uterus, whatever the case may be, there are consequences. So let's play this out. Let's have a little thought experiment, you might say. Okay? If no man's lain with you, verse 19, if you've not committed adultery, no problem. So let's say a woman is put in this position. Okay, you're going to drink this. Your husband's brought you here. Here's this little solution that you're going to drink. If you're not guilty, you're good to go. If you are guilty, your thighs are going to rot and your stomach's going to swell. Do you think it might be possible that she might say, okay, guilty? Do what? What's the word I'm looking for? Scare tactic. But just kind of in essence to bring it out. Because as you continue reading down through the text, she's not going to be able to have children. Now, if she's not guilty, again, she's free to go. And so this might be one of those things that, here's what's going to happen. You could just confess. Because didn't we just talk about confession of sin in the previous verses of this chapter? So you don't have to drink this. You could just confess. If she were guilty, look at verse, we'll just keep reading here. I would start at verse 20 again. But if thou hast gone aside to another instead of thy husband, and if thou be defiled, and some man have lain with thee beside thine husband, then the priest shall charge the woman with an oath of cursing, and the priest shall say unto the woman, the Lord make thee a curse, and an oath among the people, thy people, when the Lord doth make thy thigh to rot, and thy belly to swell. What's the woman supposed to say, according to verse 22? So be it. Now again, if she's innocent, there's no fear here. Okay, that's what it'll be. And like I say, what are the, consequences? What are the consequences if she is innocent? Her husband's dragged her through this. I don't know. It doesn't address that. But what we're dealing with here is one thing that it does to me as I read this text, because it's an interesting text, no question about that, is it protects the wife from an unjustifiably jealous husband. Because what can a jealous man do? Let's look at that real quick. Take your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 5. Just think for yourself for a second. What might a jealous husband do who has suspicion? Perhaps it's justifiable suspicion about his wife. What's possible? Divorce? Maybe abuse? Okay? Let's see. Proverbs. See, I have Proverbs 5 in here. And I knew it was Proverbs 6, so that the outline is wrong. It's Proverbs 6. It begins in verse 20. We're not going to read all of this, but it's a father speaking to a son, verse 20. You need to pay attention to what I have to say to you, to keep you from the evil woman, verse 24. Now, here's the question. Are there evil men too? Yeah. But this is a man writing to his son, so it makes sense that he's talking about an evil woman to his son. Don't lust after her beauty in your heart. By means of a harlot, a man is reduced to a crust of bread. An adulteress will prey upon his precious life. Somebody read verses 27 and 28 of Proverbs 6. What is the answer to those questions? No, it's not possible. And what's he talking about, though? Yes, but what fire? The immoral woman, the adulteress of verse 26. So, let me see here. Somebody read Proverbs 6, verses 34 and 35. All right. Scripture tells me when this occurs, and again, this can go both ways, but this is a dad writing to his boy. There's no way to satiate your jealousy if your wife does this. Or the woman with whom you've committed adultery, there's no way to satiate her husband's jealousy. What are you going to do then? Can you take fire to your bosom and not be burned? You don't mess around with this. So, back to Numbers chapter 5. Chapter 5. Proverbs 6. Numbers 5. All right. Spirit of jealousy. The spirit of suspicion. He takes her to the priest. If you drink this and nothing happens, great. If you drink it and this happens, here are going to be the consequences. And she agrees to it. Verse 22. Amen. And again, if there's nothing to fear, then she would obviously drink it. But if there is something to fear, maybe she wouldn't. Makes sense to me. The priest shall write these curses in a book, and he shall blot them out with the bitter water. The New King James says, the priest shall write these curses in a book, and he shall scrape them off into the bitter water. So whatever was used to write this down is added to the mixture of the holy water and the dust from the tabernacle floor, and she would drink it. the offering would be made and things like this. Let's see. Verse 27. And when you have made her to drink the water, then it shall come to pass that if she be defiled and have gone and have done trespass against her husband, that the water that causes the curse shall enter into her and become bitter, and her belly shall swell and her thigh rot. And the woman shall be a curse among her people. She's not defiled, she's clean. And notice verse 28, she shall be free and shall conceive seed. So the implication is she can't have children after this. But if she's free, she can. This is the law of jealousies when a wife goes aside to another instead of her husband and is defiled. Right, nothing happens. Yep. Right. Well, the key is back up in verse 13. There's no witnesses, and she wasn't caught. Yeah. Yeah. So here's an interesting thing. I'm going to throw this out at you because this actually happened to me a couple years ago. Writing, I used to write a lot about politics on Facebook. So I addressed the abortion issue when Roe v. Wade was overturned, which Christians have been praying for decades, and it happened, and it's like half Christians lost their mind over it. Can't believe those rights were taken away. Anyway, in verse 21, then the priest shall put the woman under the oath of the curse, and he shall say to the woman, may your thigh rot and your belly swell. In the 2011 version of the New International Version, it says that this drink would cause a miscarriage. That's not in the text at all. So I wrote about Roe v. Wade and its overturn, and I had someone who claimed to be a Christian just go off and talk about how the Bible justifies abortion in certain cases. And Numbers chapter 5 proves that. That has nothing to do with this. There's no pregnancy. But that's how people will take the Bible and twist it. There were certainly consequences if the woman was guilty, but an unwanted pregnancy, a miscarriage, an abortion, that's nowhere in the text. And so you have these. So if I'm not mistaken, somebody Google this. If I'm not mistaken, I think the 2011 NIV does something weird with gender in the text. It seems like I read that as I was looking at this, but if somebody wants to do that, see if the 2011 NIV addresses gender issues. It's amazing how many different versions of the Bible you can get in English, and well, some of them are just not good at all. Anyway. Interesting text. Again, what happens, like Tammy was bringing up, if she's innocent and she passes well, what then? Well, he has to go home with her. I suppose they'll deal with it later. We'll talk about this when we get home, kind of thing. I don't know. The text doesn't really say. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Right. Because as you look at the end here, verse 30, when the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, and he be jealous over his wife, and she shall set the woman before the Lord. That's what with the priest and the test and all that. The priest shall execute upon her all this law. Then shall the man be guiltless from iniquity, and this woman shall bear her iniquity. She's going to have to live with this from then on out. But the key, and that's why I pointed that out in the beginning, the key is there in verse 13. No witnesses, and she wasn't, as John 8 says, caught in the very act. Anybody find anything on what I was... Okay, yeah. Gender neutrality, yeah. I knew there was something about that. So if you're looking for a new Bible, don't get that one. I mean, it might be interesting to have just to see what people have done with the text. But, yeah, I knew there was something along those lines.
Like an example, they gave a list of examples, like Mark chapter 4, verse 25, the NIV 2011 reads, "Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have,
Okay.
what they have will be taken from them."
Whoever instead of he who, yeah.
In 1984, the NIV used he and him.
Yeah, okay. Well, and that just falls right in line with the societal currents, doesn't it? Because, everything has to be equal all the time, and there's no differences, we're told. All right, so your last blank in this section, this passage highlights the reality/burden of suspicion and the seriousness of adultery. The seriousness of adultery. That's your last blank in that section. Any other questions or comments on that particular section? Good. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Forrest.
When this was translated, it uses jealousy a lot.
Yeah.
Why? Jealousy doesn't seem like the right word to me. I know you kept bringing up like he's suspicious.
Suspicion, yeah.
But
He suspected her of being defiled.
to me, that normally fit up the word jealousy. I guess we think of jealousy as like a possession thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he's possessive of his wife, and someone took. Is that why they use jealousy there? He suspicion that someone else is taking his wife.
Well, I would compare this jealousy here to the Lord thy God is a jealous God. And that's said throughout the Old Testament. That's not God really wants what you have. It's He's yours, you're His, and nobody else's. Same kind of principle with marriage.
So it's just
Possessive, yeah.
Isn't it interesting how involved God was then, though, like for that substance that they drank to actually either prove innocence or prove guilt, and it was controlled by God on what happened, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. He's
All-knowing.
intimately involved. Yeah. And again, so one of the things I mentioned earlier, kind of in passing, is it protected woman from unjustified jealousy. Because if she were innocent, she would have no problem with this test, and that would kind of put the husband in a bad light too, not just with her, but maybe with the priest, and I don't know. Just something I thought about. I just wrote that down in the margin of my Bible. Sir? Well, I don't think that would matter.
He's giving her something to drink that could make her sick if he chose to.
Well, I guess if he chose to, but this is pretty specific as to how it's to be done. Right. That's an interesting discussion. Could they have more than one wife at a time? We see that, don't we? I mean, David had at least 8 wives. Solomon, of course. The first time we see that is Lamech in Genesis chapter 4. Is it chapter 4 or 5? Took 2 wives. To me, the easiest, and it's not the easiest, but the way to answer that question is that it was permitted. Kind of like divorce. Moses permitted you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. From the garden, God had a plan of one man and one woman. Man perverted that, obviously, and very early on. And then what the law of Moses does is it seems to regulate the behavior. While it doesn't certainly condone adultery, I don't know if that's the best way to phrase it, but it regulates the behavior of the Israelites even in marriage. That's a subject that's hard to address. I'll just be honest with you. It really is. I struggle with that one. Because I know what it says in the garden. I see what then is done. And then I go to Hebrews 11 and these heroes of faith, and, well, that's a difficult subject. But there were some things permitted under the law of Moses that are no longer permitted. The law of Christ is different. So that might be a Fifth Sunday Q&A kind of deal. Right. Well, and that's another. From the beginning, God didn't condone it. And just because the Bible records something doesn't mean God approved of it either. So that's something to consider as well.
What happened to John the Baptist when he spoke up?
Yeah, John lost his head, didn't he?
He told someone that should have been put to death, and he was.
Right. Well,
He said he did that.
and for preachers and teachers today, you can still lose your proverbial head. They'll cut your head off spiritually because they don't want to hear it. You're just a troublemaker.
Well, can you imagine what the priest would tell Solomon? You got way too many wives.
Not enough priests to cover Solomon's deal.
Hey, Barry, which version did you say used miscarriage?
2011 NIV. And it's in verse, I wrote it down here, verse 21. Numbers 5:21.
I'm looking at a NIV. I don't know if it's is there different NIV versions?
Oh, yeah. There are several revisions.
I don't know which one this is. This one here has miscarriage verse 27. And what verse did you say?
21. I looked it up myself.
21 and 27 in this, but I don't know which. This is just an app that just says NIV, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. I Googled it and was specific. 2011 NIV, Numbers 5:21. Yeah, and it said miscarriage. So anyway, like I was saying, that's one thing I brought up is people will try to use this chapter in justification for abortion, and that's not at all what's going on here.
It don't even make sense in this NIV that I'm looking at. It says her abdomen will swell and her womb will miscarry.
Yeah.
It will become a curse. But however, the woman has not made herself impure but clean. She will be cleared of guilt and will be able to have children.
Yeah, that's kind of contradictory, isn't it?
It don't make no sense. She's either pregnant now or she's not.
Yeah.
This wants to play home.
Yeah. You can't ever be a little bit pregnant. All right? You are or you aren't. All right, let's go to Numbers chapter 6. Please. This is an interesting chapter, too, because the Nazarites. Now, we need to draw the distinction between a Nazarite and a Nazarene, because Jesus was a Nazarene. Those are not the same thing. A Nazarene was a person born or who was from Nazareth, up near the Sea of Galilee, up north in the Promised Land. A Nazarite, here's the interesting thing, and I didn't put it in your outline. This is your first blank. The Hebrew term is Nazir, Nazir. So this is one of those words that wasn't translated. They just used the letters and made an English word out of it. The Hebrew term is Nazir. It means, and so you could read it this way, you're reading Numbers chapter 6, speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when either a man or a woman shall separate themselves to you and vow a vow of consecration or vow a vow of separation. That's the definition of the term. Who is the Nazarite that we read about in Scripture? Samson. All right, so so the word only occurs here in number 6 and then 3 times in Judges, once in Lamentations, and twice in Amos. And the references in Lamentations and Amos are in regard to God punishing His people because the Nazarites violated their vows. The consecrated ones didn't do what they were supposed to do. So when you hear the word Nazarite, know what it means, consecrated one or devoted one. Either a man or a woman could take this vow. Again, the only one we're familiar with is Samson, right? Verse 2. Nazarites were not to partake of any product of the grapevine, verses 3 and 4. They were not to cut their hair all the days of their vow. And that's another thing, is there's no minimum and maximum time of vow. It's just a person would make this vow for however long, and they couldn't do these things. Couldn't go near a dead body, even if it was, verse 7. Even if it was his father, his mother, his brother, sister when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. So this is a serious matter, serious vow. If someone suddenly died near a Nazarite, he was to shave his head, make an atoning sacrifice or offering, and could restart the vow if he so chose. Verses 9 through 12. When the vow was completed, offerings were to be made and his head to be shaved. Verses 13 through 18. The priest was to receive his portion of the offering, and the one who vowed was again permitted to partake of grape produce. So, what in the world is the practical application of that? Well, that's your last blank here. Vows were not to be taken lightly. If you've ever been to a wedding, Oath, yeah. The preacher a lot of times will say this is not to be, what? Taken lightly. Well, let's look at some verses here. Somebody who wants to read for me? Tonight? Who wants to read for me tonight? Colin, I saw your hand. Do Matthew 5:37. Emily, James 5:12.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 37, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one.
It really goes back up to verse 33, and the hypocrites were very elaborate about their vows and swearing by certain things, but if the thing by which they swore was not really that big of a deal, then they could break their vow. Jesus says that's not how you do it. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. All right? James 5:12.
But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation.
Okay. Anything more than that's from the evil one, and if that's how you behave, you're going to be damned for it. Keep your word. And I mean, right next to possible adultery in Numbers chapter 5. I'm not saying that was done intentionally, but it is kind of interesting to make that connection of the seriousness of vows. Sure. He did kill just a whole lot of people. Samson's not exactly the model to follow.
Well, I'm just saying, he had the vow,
Yes.
and with that vow came great power,
Right.
and yet they weren't to be near a dead body, but yet he killed people.
Right.
A little difficult to reconcile.
Yeah, it's like he didn't even... There's a process to go through if you do that.
Well, you know he was near.
Yeah, he's surrounded. He's causing it. There's a process to go through if you do get near a dead body, even if it's an accident. He didn't do that either, but he still has this power. And I think one of the things too with Samson is obviously he is a Nazirite, but he's also a judge. And one of the things we read about every one of the judges is that when they are in that position, they are filled with the Holy Spirit. And there has to be something there too, because they are, while none of them certainly are perfect, and he's at the other end of the spectrum from perfect, they are leading God's people for the specific purpose of leading God's people, delivering God's people from the Midianites and the Ammonites, all these enemies that are oppressing them. However long their reign as judge lasts, God's Spirit is with them. Shave your head if that, yeah. And certain offerings to make. Well, yeah, he kept his... Right. But we don't have that in the text, so... Right. Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
That was where he told Delilah that was where the power came from, was from his hair, not to cut it.
Right.
So that was the big deal. I don't know, maybe there's a chance I guess he shaved it and started over.
Maybe. I know. Do what now?
If they were supposed to, like, shave their heads
Yes. And start over.
He didn't do it, he's not following the rules of the law.
Right.
So, I mean, why does God still live there?
Well, again, I think it's the purpose of the king, the purpose of the judges was for them to reign for however long they reigned, for the purpose of delivering from their enemies. And it's in the time, of course, of they've just conquered the land and divided the land. It's in that early stage of the nation of Israel. And again, while they are judges, they are filled with the Spirit. In fact, in the book of Judges, you see that phrase time and time again. They're filled with the Spirit. So it is more, while Samson did take the Nazirite vow, there was more to his strength than just the Nazirite vow. It's also the fact that he was a judge who was filled with the Spirit and who did a lot of bad things during that whole time. Yeah, he lost his strength when he gave away his secret. No question about that.
But you think that Paul took the vow in Acts 18?
Who said that? Oh, that's an interesting. I think I wrote an article on that back a few years ago. We know that he paid for the vow, for the sacrifice for, 4 others who did take that vow. And he went to have his head shaved. And that's the way a lot of people do lean. The problem with that, the way I see it, is if Paul took the Nazirite vow, what can't he do as a member of the church? He wouldn't be able to take the Lord's Supper. So if he did, and I don't know that he did, but if he did, he would be in violation of a particular point of the law of Christ. That's kind of, I don't really have a firm stance on it, but that's one thing that I remember talking about is he wouldn't be able to take the Lord's Supper to do something that was under the law of Moses. And that's, most of his letters write against that. We're not under that law anymore. So I don't know that he did the Nazirite vow. There was some kind of vow, though. There's no question about that. All right. The last few verses of Numbers 6 is Aaron's blessing upon Israel. The Lord bless thee. Let's see here. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. That's nice. I mean, there's nothing wrong. I've heard churches do that kind of thing. People say that to each other, pray that for each other. There's nothing wrong with praying for that for each other. Yes? No. No, the Church of the Nazarene, and that's the difference. A Nazarene is from Nazareth, like Jesus. A Nazarite has nothing to do with Nazareth. It's just that word Nazir in the Hebrew means a consecrated one. That's all that means. All right, well, we made it through that. Appreciate the interaction, guys. Yeah, I don't think that he did. There was some kind of vow that he took. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's why I had us read Matthew 5:37 and James 5:12. If you're going to do something, keep your word.